Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to guide you through this one today because we're doing a highly structured deep dive analysis of two absolute classic fables. But, we aren't just going to sit here and read them like a bedtime story. Instead, we're going to tear down the exact mechanics of how physical traits and intentions actually drive the narrative in these stories. It's like a giant puzzle, and we're going to put the pieces together. So let's just dive right in.
Right off the bat, I want you to ask yourself a question. Can a really small action bring about massive consequences? Just think about how often a tiny, seemingly insignificant choice, or even a minor physical difference between two people, can trigger a massive chain reaction in our everyday lives. Keep that idea right in the back of your mind as we unpack our source material today, because as you'll see, the sheer scale of an action doesn't always match the scale of its outcome.
All right, moving into Section 1. Fascinating jungle characters. Before we even think about touching the plot, we really need to understand the physical reality of the players on the board.
What's absolutely fascinating here is the sheer visual power of the text we're analyzing. Just imagine this description of a massive, fierce lion sleeping peacefully outside his cave. The text specifically makes a point to highlight that his body was shining like gold. It emphasizes his closed eyes, his heavy mane, and just this incredibly majestic appearance. The author spends serious time building up this physical presence. This isn't just an animal, right? This is a heavy, glowing monument of power at rest.
And we absolutely need that heavy, majestic imagery for this text comparison to truly land. We have the massive, sleeping king of the jungle juxtaposed right up against a tiny, mischievous mouse. The source text deliberately plays up these two extremes. On one hand, you have immense, dormant power, and on the other hand, you have this tiny, erratic, hyperactive energy.
Now contrast that massive physical mismatch with our second tale, the fox and the stork. Here, the text doesn't focus on massive size differences at all. Instead, it highlights highly specific functional physical traits alongside mental characteristics. We've got a fox whose primary descriptor is cunning, which is a mental trait, obviously, and a stork neighbor who is defined by a very specific physical tool, a long beak. And it turns out, these specific traits are exactly what's going to drive the entire conflict.
Which brings us to Section 2, Action and its Impact. Let's see how these contrasting physical and mental traits actually interact once things get moving.
Getting back to our lion and mouse, let's trace the exact sequence of actions detailed in the source. First up, the mouse is just jumping around, totally in his own world. Second, he gets completely lost in his own playful mischief. And third, entirely caught up in his game, he suddenly climbs right onto the sleeping lion's back. It is a progression of pure, unadulterated playfulness. There is absolutely zero malice here. It's just a complete accident.
But, well, as we all know, actions have consequences regardless of intent. So what actually happened when the lion's sleep was broken? The source text leaves us hanging right on this exact moment of tension. The tiny mouse climbs up, the piece is totally shattered, and boom, the lion's eyes snap open.
The absolutely crucial takeaway here is that this was a purely unintentional disruption. It was a complete accident, driven entirely by mischief and, frankly, a total lack of situational awareness. The tiny physical form of the mouse is exactly what allowed him to literally traverse the massive physical form of the lion, causing a sudden, terrifying awakening. It's chaotic cause and effect, driven purely by accident.
All right, let's shift gears to Section 3, Tit for Tat. Now we're going to examine a very different type of cause and effect from our second story. Think about how perfectly mirrored this sequence of events is. Step 1, the cunning fox invites the stork over and deliberately serves soup in a totally flat plate. Step 2, the stork, with its long beak, obviously cannot drink it. Step 3, the stork returns the invitation and serves food in a narrow jug. Step 4, the fox cannot eat. It is literally a masterclass in calculated sequential logic. Every single action is a direct, deliberate response to the one right before it.
This brilliantly illustrates the core mechanic of this story. The flat plate and the narrow-necked jug aren't just props for a dinner party, they're actually weapons. The fox weaponizes the flat plate against the stork's long beak, and then, in perfect symmetry, the stork weaponizes the narrow-necked jug against the fox's snout. They are intentionally exploiting each other's physical traits.
And this all boils down to a very specific intent: teaching a lesson.
The text explicitly states that the stork hosted the fox precisely for this reason. This was no accident, like the mouse jumping on the lion. No, this was a highly calculated reaction to an intentional slight. The stork analyzed the fox's cunning behavior, totally understood the physical mechanics of the insult, and engineered a perfectly matched consequence. Finally, Section 4. Main lessons of the stories. Why does analyzing these specific mechanics actually matter to us?
Well, when you break it all down, you can clearly see the structural differences we've mapped out today. Story 1 is defined by an unintentional act, an extreme difference in size, and a sudden, unpredictable reaction when that lion wakes up. Story 2, on the other hand, is defined by intentional trickery, a difference in physical shape rather than just size, and highly calculated revenge. By putting them side by side, we see that the nature of our actions, whether they're totally careless like the mouse or manipulative like the fox, dictates the exact shape of the reaction we receive from the world.
So, I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. Trickery and mischief. Do they both actually have the same consequence? We saw pure mischief wake a sleeping giant, and we saw calculated trickery invite a perfectly tailored revenge. As you navigate your own life, ask yourself if the actions you're putting out into the world are careless or if they're calculated, and maybe consider what kind of reaction is waiting to wake up. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope this structured breakdown gave you a whole new perspective on these classic texts. Catch you next time.